very special midweek episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Yes, well, I had to have a few days off for a spot of DIY, so I thought, yeah, let's do an extra episode of the show. So, you lucky people, you get me twice this week. Good, isn't it? Anyway, so you probably remember a few weeks ago I did an episode of the show on mezcal, and I mentioned that I was hopefully going to do an episode of the show on tequila, and here we have it. So firstly, a big thank you to Jennifer from Casa Agave for all the samples for today's episode of the show. Hope you'll enjoy this episode of the show as much as you did the mezcal episode of the show. Well, at least I won't have any issues with regards to varieties of agave, as I may well have said in the mezcal episode of the show. There is only one agave that's used in tequila manufacture, the agave tequiliana, obviously, or blue Weber, or blue agave, or whatever they want to call it. I mean, there's 1,000,001 names for all these bloody agaves. But anyway, so there's just one agave, and that's all you've got to worry about. But before we get on to the actual spirits themselves, a little bit of a history lesson. You're probably thinking, what the hell is he going on about? Well, in 1862, to bear with me on this one, actually in 1861, a chap called Benito Juarez was elected El Presidente of Mexico. This came at the end of the Mexican Civil War, which lasted from 1858 to 1860, and obviously dried up the coffers of the Mexican government, and consequently they were skinned, and they were in debt to Spain, Britain and France. Mexican government being skinned? Yeah, something's never changed, I guess, really. So anyway, basically he comes to power and goes, well, we can't pay you, and defaulted on payments to those three countries. So those three countries said, well, we're going to go and kick some Mexican butt then, and duly sort of landed in Mexico in 1861. The British and the Spanish, being the sort of the more hospitable of countries, came to an arrangement, shall we say, with Juarez, and buggered off back home. They probably really weren't in the mood for yet another war, and the expense that goes along with that. But those imperialist French decided, like unlike the other two, they were going to kick some Mexican butt, and basically teach them a damn good lesson for reneging on their payments. And so the French army consisted of about 6,500 troops, and was led by one General Charles de Lorentz, and they obviously captured Orziba, which is on the coast, and decided to march further inland, heading obviously logically heading for Mexico City. And but obviously they had to deal with the Mexican army, which was led by General Ignacio Zaragoza, who had about 4,500. Well, troops is probably stretching the terminology. I mean, I'm guessing the Mexican army was, well, certainly the Mexican army was nowhere near as well trained as the French army, and was kind of made up of, I guess, a core of regular troops and probably conscripts, levies, that kind of thing. So even if the sort of numbers were fairly balanced, I think the Mexicans would have probably been on a bit of a hiding to nothing. But anyway, good old Ignacio sort of harassed the French and skirmished with the French, and actually sort of did a pretty damn good job, sort of, keeping them under control to a certain extent. But eventually had to retreat and retreated to the city of Puebla, which also consisted of two forts called Lorenzo and Guadalupe. And looking at the map, it's quite formidable, steep terrain and all that kind of stuff. And the French thought, in their usual bloody arrogance, that they would turn up and to the battle, and just by turning up they'd win. They reckoned that the inhabitants of Puebla were going to be friendly towards them, and as soon as they massed up below the city, the residents would kick the garrison out and welcome the French in with open arms and all that kind of stuff. But not, shall we say. As per usual, the French overestimated and ended up having to attack the city, and in their usual laissez-faire way decided, well, we'll have a drink or two before we start. We're not going to start before midday, are we? We're civilised. We don't fight in the mornings. Excuse me. So basically they kicked off late. They didn't really sort of do a particularly good job. The artillery bombardment started late, and the Mexicans were a bit bloody dogged and held them at bay quite nicely. And essentially it came to sort of like late in the day, and the French were looking at sort of getting absolutely bloody nowhere, and had to commit the reserves in the third wave of the battle. Unfortunately, their artillery had run out of ammunition. I mean, talk about bloody cock-up. So in they go unsupported, and no surprise, they get a bit of a bloody nose. And basically the French decide to cut their losses, and they took some quite heavy losses, it has to be said, and decided to retreat back towards the coast. And good old Zaragoza had figured this one out and basically set an ambush for them and outflanked them with cavalry and infantry on the way back, and gave them a bloody good kicking. And we all like to hear the French getting a bloody good kicking, don't we? So anyway, so this is called the Battle of Puebla, or the Battle of Cinco de Mayo, because it happened on the 5th of May 1862, and it's a celebration that the Mexicans have. I mean, you're going to celebrate giving the French kicking, aren't you, really? I mean, we don't exactly celebrate Waterloo Day, but we're quite pleased about that one. Although it was a little bit short-lived, because Napoleon III obviously threw a bit of a strop and sent reinforcements, and the city was captured practically a year to the day after that particular battle. The French then sort of duly marched all the way up to Mexico City, kicked Juarez out, and he disappeared into exile. And so in actual fact it had no real bearing on the general outcome, apart from sort of being something I guess the Mexicans could be proud of. Anyway, why the hell am I talking about a bloody battle in 1862? Well, one of these tequila brands is called the 30-30 tequila. I'm getting there eventually. Bear with me, stick with me on this one, please. Anyway, apparently this 30-30 is reference to a rifle that the Mexican army used during this particular battle. Or is it? Now, I'm no expert on rifles. I mean, I like ancient weaponry, I like swords and stuff like that, and one of my things is Napoleonic era warfare. But you didn't know that one, did you? But anyway, so I had to kind of look this one up, and I think the 30-30 is a reference to the .30-30 Winchester small bore rifle, which was produced in America. However, it was actually first produced in 1895. Think about that one. 30 years after the battle. So it's unlikely that the Mexican troops actually used that. So what rifles did they actually use, you're probably asking? Well, if you could think about it, in 1862, 65, that was a period of time where the American Civil War was coming to an end, and the Americans were basically clandestinely supplying the Mexican forces with arms and ammunition. And after their adventures with the French and the British, they probably thought, yeah, well, we'll give you a hand to give the French a kicking. And looking at the list of rifles that were in use during the American Civil War, it was unlikely that, obviously, that the Winchester small bore was used, considering it wasn't made till 30 years after. In fact, there was probably a handful of weapons that could have probably been used by the Mexican army. Amongst them was the Springfield 1861 rifled musket, the Model 66 Winchester, the Henry .44 rifle, if you had potloads of money, because apparently it was pretty expensive, and the 5650 Spencer carbine. Great name, huh? So they were the weapons that were more than likely used at the Battle of Pueblo. So in reality, 3030 Tequila should have probably called itself 5650 Tequila, if they wanted to be more accurate. Now, I could be completely wrong in this, and maybe Jennifer or somebody from 3030 Tequila will probably know more about this than me, and will probably say, but no, it doesn't actually relate to the 3030 Winchester small bore rifle. It means, but anyway, that's just by the by, as I say, just a little interesting snippet of information. I hope you've not fallen asleep by now. I mean, so yeah, I'm going to shut up now, and I think it's probably time to taste some tequila, don't you? Actually, I think I better introduce them before I actually taste them. Getting ahead of myself. Right, okay, so as I said, we're going to look at the 3030 tequila range. We're also going to look at another tequila called Creencias. I hope my pronunciation of that was reasonable. So we have the Creencias Tequila Organic Blanco. So I'm guessing it's an organically made tequila. Kind of gives it away, doesn't it? This is bottled at 38%. It is double distilled in stainless steel. And then we're going to look at the Creencias Reposado. This is also bottled at 38% and spends 8 months in oak. The area, obviously these all come from Jalisco, which is the only place where you can produce tequila, and the area of Jalisco it comes from is Los Vals Tequila La Primavera. Great name, huh? I think I did a pretty damn good job with that pronunciation. Actually, I studied Spanish in school, so I kind of, yeah, okay. Although that was a long time ago. So anyway, moving on to the 3030 range, we're going to kick off obviously with the Blanco. This is bottled at 40%. Again, like the Creencias, it is double distilled in stainless steel. Then we're going to look at the Reposado. This is also bottled at 40%, and again, like the Creencias, spends 8 months or thereabouts in oak. And finally, we're going to look at the Anjeo, which spends a little bit more time in oak, in actual fact, between 12 and 13 months, but is bottled at the same ABV as the other two. Incidentally, this particular tequila comes from the Highlands, Capilla de Guadalupe. Fair enough. So, right, that's the range. That's what we'll be tasting this afternoon. Now I'm going to taste some tequila. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Creencias, Blanco. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Fresh, quite rounded. It's got a nice kind of slightly savoury, sort of vanilla-y kind of character. There's an edge to it. There's a little acetic note kind of coming through. Certainly nowhere near as acetic as some of the mezcals, certainly with using the espadrine agave. It's got a nice tang to it. It's got a slight citrus edge. It's slightly smoky. It's got a nice roundness. It's kind of quite easygoing. It's less intense and less acetic, certainly, than some of the mezcals. So I'm guessing it's kind of a more kind of, I don't know, user-friendly, I suppose. It's something you could probably, if you wanted to explore the whole concept of Mexican spirits, starting with something like this would be a good lead-in. Then you could try some of the more weird and wonderful stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a pleasant nose. See what the palate's like. It's a little underpowered, I would say. 38% is a bit, but it's pleasantly balanced. You've got some lovely sweetness. You've got that classic sort of pulped white fruit, a little bit of natural sugar. There's some, again, acetic notes, some citrus. It's quite nicely balanced. There's a touch of light pepper and smoke on the finish, but it's a little bit sort of underwhelming, shall we say. I mean, it's pleasant, nice finish, it lingers, but it's a bit kind of, like I said, it just kind of, you get a bit of a burst, and although, like I said, it lingers, it just sort of, it lacks a bit of intensity, I think, is what I'm basically trying to say. But the quality is pretty good, so nice start. Okay, so let's move on to the Reposado. So let's see what 8 months in oak does for it. Subtly oaked. There's a little bit more of a lemony kind of note coming out. It's got a, it feels less rounded in actual fact. There's a little bit more of that slightly acetic, slightly lemony, acidic kind of note. But again, the oak is kind of quite subtle. It's sitting back. It's kind of adding some richness and some roundness. Not overtly vanillaed, but that's good. I think the balance is quite pleasant. The thing is with tequila and mezcal and other general white spirits that tend to be aged in oak, the oak does tend to sort of take away some of the character to a certain extent, unless you've got a very characterful spirit that will kind of stand up to it. And I don't know, maybe if this had been bottled at a slightly higher ABV, again it would have been more intense, but it's nice and soft, it's subtle. Yeah, let's see what the palate's like. Again, the balance is pleasant, not too oaked. The oak is kind of adding a slightly sort of tannic structure rather than an overt vanillan character. Again, the pulped fruit comes through. It's possibly sort of emphasised the pepperiness a little bit more, maybe. Yeah, rounded, chewy, pleasant. Just like I said, it just lacks a real sort of intensity, and that I think is all just down to the fact of being bottled at 38%, which I'm quite surprised at being bottled at that kind of ABV. Not that of course you have to bottle any spirit, well, tequila or mezcal for example, at sort of 40% plus, but you know, it's all about levels of intensity at the end of the day. And I think sort of, you know, you might have a lovely spirit, and this is a lovely spirit, but bottling at such a low ABV does tend to sort of lose some of the intensity, should we say. But yeah, I mean, pleasant. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 56, oh no, sorry, 3030 tequila. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Now that is a lovely nose. A little bit more edgier than the Creencias, sorry. More pulped fruit, more intensity, and it's, I mean, it just goes to show how an extra 2% alcohol really does make the difference. Touch of pulped fruit, again slightly savoury. It's got a kind of soya beany sort of character. I mean, that sounds a bit ridiculous, but it's got that kind of beany sort of skin fleshiness. I mean, I do often get sort of fleshy kind of fruit with both tequila and mezcal, and there's a little bit of straw, there's a little bit of slightly acetic notes in the background. I mean, this is, yeah, this is beautifully balanced, and it's not particularly expensive either. You know, it's what retails, I think, hopefully, yes, Jennifer, you know what I mean, under 30 quid, and that's lovely. Getting some nice smoky notes kind of coming through now. Yeah, and there's a sort of a rawness right at the end of if you sniff hard enough, you get a kind of almost kind of raw agave kind of note, but you have to work hard to get that out. But overall, it kind of really sort of, it's just a lovely balanced tequila. Let's see what the palates give us. Soft, peppery, edgy, pleasantly balanced again. Got a little bit of that slightly acetic sort of citric kind of note, but it's lovely and full. Lots and lots of fleshy fruit. Really balanced, lovely sort of intensity, and a really good length, and I like that. I think that's very, very impressive. It's not too weird and wonderful, yet it's not too commercial, if you see what I mean. It kind of, I think, kind of strides the line between the two different styles, and really nice. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Reposado. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. More obvious oak. Quite a lot of vanilla, toffee, and quite a sweetness to the fruit as well. Although, in saying that, it's got a lovely smokiness, and you can still get the spirit. The spirit is still noticeable. There's that pulped fruit. Slightly less edgy now. I mean, the oak is just kind of taking the edge off the edginess. You know, rounded. I like the combination of the toastiness of the oak and the slight smokiness from the agave. It's really nicely balanced. I mean, this is the sort of thing that would appeal to whiskey drinkers. So, you know, this is the sort of thing that if you're a whiskey drinker and you're looking to sort of get into different spirits and you're looking to get into tequila, this is where you would kind of start. Kick off with a sort of like a Reposado like this. It's got some lovely, you're on safe ground. Talking of safe ground, well, no, not talking of safe ground. That's a bollocks thing to say. Talking of the 5th of May, I've decided that next year, on the 5th of May, to celebrate the Battle of Pueblo, or the Cinco de Mayo, we're going to have a tequila and mezcal tasting in the shop. So, although it's not actually up on the website and you can't purchase tickets yet, but if you are interested, we'll probably have them up in the new year. But if you want to sort of reserve yourself a place beforehand, just ping me an email to the usual email, and or use the contact page on the website. And but yeah, this is nice. This is, I suppose, if I was being sort of uber critical, I would say there's a little bit too much oak. But I think the thing is that this would kind of serve a purpose in getting people that love whiskey and love oak aged spirit into tequila. So it's kind of serving a purpose, I suppose. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. A lot more tequila character on the palate. The oak is not quite so obvious. It does add some vanilla, it does add some softness, some smoothness at the edges, but you're getting lots of peppery, slightly smoky, pulped agave fruit, less of the sort of acetic notes. It seems like the oak kind of just is either removing those kind of elements or is certainly sort of masking them. I mean, again, it's got a mouth-watering, slightly citric finish, but that's actually really very, very enjoyable. And like I said, I honestly think that if you like oak-aged spirits, you like whiskey, things like that, you would really get into this, and you really should give it a try. Well, you should give it a try once we've actually got it stocked, I should say, but we're working on it, shall we say. Yeah, that's impressive. And finally, let's take a look at the Anjeo. So this spent a little bit more time in oak. So as you can see, the colour is quite impressive. Just for spending about a year in an oak cask. Obviously American oak. Well, it would be interesting. I don't know if there are any tequilas. There probably must be some tequilas that use ex-sherry casks or maybe ex-whiskey casks or something like that. That could be quite interesting. Can you imagine a sort of like an ex-Lafroig casked Reposado? You know, that would be really cool. Anyway, we're not talking about that. Let's have a look at this one. Oh, more lemony, more oak, butter toffee. The reality is again that the agave is really kind of underneath all that oak, but again I'm getting a touch of citrus, I'm getting a little bit of acetic notes, but it's the fragrant oak that's the obvious note here, and it's lovely, really clean, slightly toasty, slightly smoky, but it's got the edge to it. You know, it's kind of not all just about the oak, although the oak is obviously the most noticeable part of it. It's got a difference. You know, you could put this in a blind tasting with whiskey, and you know, you would go, yeah, oak aged, but there's something else there. You know, and it's an intriguing spirit. It has to be said, if nothing else. Let's see what the palate's like. Oak up first, again, lots of vanilla, touch of toffee, and in comes the agave. That's got real intensity. Obviously not quite cask strength intensity, but it's got a lovely intensity nevertheless. Peppery, fleshy, slightly acetic again, almost minerally, the aftertaste. It's kind of that sort of line between sort of citric and minerality. It's just got that real palate cleansing finish to it, and it's got a lovely progression, it has to be said. You know, like I said, kicking off with the oak, then you get the tequila character, the agave kind of coming through, a little bit of smokiness right on the end. Fabulously balanced, really, really nice. That is an impressive spirit. And like I said, you know, if you love oak aged spirits, then definitely worth tasting. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, like I said, again, a very big thank you to Jennifer from Casa Agave for the samples for today's episode of the show, and two quite different tequilas, I think. I mean, the Creencias, I kind of like the Blanco, and I like the Reposado. I mean, flavour wise, you can't argue with it. The only thing that I personally think is that the ABV was too low. That's the only criticism I have of it. It just lacked that little bit of intensity that the 3030 had. Oh, no, sorry, 5650. Oh, sorry, no, the 3030. God, that's going to be a bloody standing joke if I ever stock this. I can tell you that. I'll be going, well, this is, God, bloody hell. Anyway. 30-30 range, yeah, I really like the 30-30 range. The Blanco, I really like it. Really nicely balanced, plenty of character, nice intensity. I mean, yeah, maybe it's me, maybe it's the fact that I'm just kind of so used to tasting spirits at a higher ABV at sort of 43, 46, etc., etc., that sort of 38 just comes across as a little bit wishy-washy. If you're not so experienced with those kind of levels of ABV, it's probably fine. It's just one of those things at the end of the day. I think sort of standout bottling for me has to be the Reposado. I love the balance on the Reposado. It's got just the right amount of oak. You can argue that the Anjeo has a little bit too much oak, but the palate has got beautiful progression, it has to be said. I mean, and so either one, depending upon what your budget is going to stretch to, is certainly worth having a look at, because both of those are very, very good. So there you go. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag, and oh, I feel like some lunch now. Yes, this is a pre-lunch episode of the show. God, bloody hell. Yes, tequila before 12, whatever next. Anyway, all that's left to say is thanks for watching. Don't forget, we will be having a tasting in the shop on the evening of the 5th of May, and hopefully I'll see some of you there if you happen to be in and around Nottingham and fancy a bit of something different. Anyway, till then, good dramming and good afternoon.